Hey everybody, it's Will here. Thanks for joining me for another tea tasting. In this episode, we're going to be trying the silver matcha from Chanoka. So this is a very premium matcha that just came in recently, and we're going to go ahead and learn how to make it and then prepare it and try it out right now. So what you're going to notice when you open up the tea is matcha is really sensitive to light, heat, and humidity. So it's going to have a few different lids. This first metal lid is to kind of keep the air out of it, and then you also have this additional plastic lid. So we're going to go ahead and take that off. So this is just to keep it away from the moisture in the air, and normally this bag is going to be sealed, but I had opened it prior to filming, so it's just going to be a little bit different. So we're going to go ahead and open this up right here, and then what we're going to do is we're going to take our chashaku. This is a bamboo spoon used for scooping matcha. And this is not an essential item to have, but it is kind of nice because, as you'll notice, it's a little hard to scoop out of these tins if you're just using a regular spoon. But this kind of more narrow teaspoon makes it a little bit easier. So we're going to go ahead and actually, what we're going to do is we're going to scoop this into a sifter. We're going to do 2 big scoops, so that's going to be about 2 grams. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead, what you'll notice here is there's some clumps starting to form just being exposed to the air for just a few minutes. What we want to do is remove that. So we're going to actually push it through the filter here, the sifter. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow it to mix more evenly into the water. You'll notice if you have a lot of clumps in your matcha, it's going to really affect the drinking experience. It's not going to be quite as smooth. You're going to kind of every once in a while kind of have this clump, and you're going to have a lot of bitterness. What you really want is to make sure it's evenly mixed into the water, and that's what sifting allows you to do. So definitely not an essential step, but if you want your tea just to be a little bit better, this is something we recommend doing. So go ahead and shake this out here. And by the way, this clay bowl is the chawan. And this is what you'll notice in a tea ceremony. You have this clay tea bowl that's being used. You don't normally make matcha in a glass just because you want a little bit more space to whisk. And I'll show you that in a second. So what you'll notice by looking at the powder here, it's a lot, after being sifted, it's a lot finer. And you're not seeing any of those clumps that you saw before. So that's really what you want. And this is going to allow the powder to mix evenly into the water. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to take our water. Temperature doesn't matter quite as much with matcha, but it is still a factor. We're going to go for 160, but you can go from 160 to maybe 170, maybe even down to 150 Fahrenheit. So in terms of Celsius, you're going maybe 60 to 70 degrees Celsius is fine for the matcha. So what I like to do is add just a tiny bit. I just like to add a tiny bit of water here, and then I'm going to go ahead and take my whisk. And I'm going to actually mix up a little bit of a paste, almost like a koicha. And by doing this, I'm just adding an extra layer of security. If I start to notice any clumps in the tea, I can go ahead and mix those in, because I really don't want any. And once you get all that water in, it's hard to notice them. So once we kind of have our little paste here, we can go ahead and add the rest of the water. What you can go ahead and do is use 100 milliliters of water for 2 grams of matcha. So it's going to be a little bit less than you might think. For leaf tea, we're doing 150 milliliters to 200 milliliters. Here we're just going to use 100 milliliters. So it's not really much water. We're really concentrating the tea. And then what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to take our bamboo whisk. This is called the chasen. It's made out of a single piece of bamboo. It's got 100 plus bristles on here that are going to move through the water and aerate the tea. We're just going to go ahead and start whisking here. I can start off by kind of scraping the sides of the bowl. Just kind of get all that matcha powder into the water so it mixes well. And then what I'm going to go ahead and do is do these kind of light wrist movements. I'm not using a whole lot of arm movement. I'm just doing these quick zigzag motions with the tea. And It may be obvious here that steeping time isn't as much of a factor. You do have more flavor come out if you kind of let the matcha settle for like a minute or two, but nowhere near as much of a factor as with leaf tea when you're making an extraction. Here you're just mixing the leaves, the powdered leaves, into water, so temperature and brewing time, things like that aren't really factors here. You're just trying to really get a good whisk going. And what I'm doing is not only mixing the matcha into the water, I'm also creating this light foam on top, which I'll show you here. So you notice like these kind of smaller bubbles here. If you see some larger ones, you can actually pop them with your whisk. But this is really what you want. It's similar to a nitro brew coffee. These bubbles kind of aerate the tea and they create this kind of creamy consistency, a lighter, airy taste, which is really nice. And yeah, what you want is you want these smaller bubbles. You don't want them to be too big. You want them to be really smooth and light and creamy. So let's go ahead and taste this. Oh wow, yes, this really bold flavor, kind of like this velvety mouthfeel, really heavy, really dense. It's definitely what you get with the premium matcha here. Okay, close this up. So what I like to look for in a premium matcha is I like to see if the tea is bold without being bitter. So this is normally the mark of a good matcha. If the tea is kind of bold and full-bodied and has plenty of flavor, but it's not too bitter, because it's very easy for a matcha to have a lot of flavor and it just being bitter. But the premium matchas have this bold flavor, this kind of heavier mouthfeel, a little bit of creaminess, but there's not really any bitterness to it. I'm getting a little bit of this floral note, almost a little bit of a nutty note as well, maybe like cashew or something like that. Very smooth, very nutty. A tiny bit of this floral note, but now I'm not really getting it so much anymore. This is a very kind of heavy, bold, full-bodied matcha. It's definitely a bit of a balancing act with matcha, because if the tea is too smooth, it just kind of tastes like milk. It doesn't really have a whole lot of flavor to it, which a lot of people like. Like for instance, the matcha washamine is very smooth, so you don't really get this bold, powerful flavor like you would with a goko matcha or with the silver matcha. But this is definitely a good balance for me. This is probably my favorite matcha, I would say. Just because you do get that power, but it's not too bitter, it's not overpowering. It's definitely a good balance. So this tea right here is the premium matcha from Uji, the silver matcha. And Uji is a really cool place. If you guys ever get a chance to visit Japan, I would definitely recommend checking out Uji. If you're interested in tea culture or tea history, you can take part in a tea ceremony there at Teihwan Tea House. You can also visit some various historical sites in the area. So for example, when I was there in November of 2019, I was staying in Kyoto at the time, and I did a little day trip down to Uji. So while I was in Kyoto, I got to check out Kozanji Temple, which is documented as being kind of really the first place that green tea was cultivated in Japan. Prior to that, it had been only grown in mostly China and then brought over to Japan, but Kozanji Temple was really when the monks started to grow their own tea to be consumed during meditation. So that was really cool to check out. And then the next day I headed down to Uji. I was working with the Uji Department of Tourism to kind of film various historical sites around Uji so we could share them with everybody. And we got to take part in the tea ceremony, which was really cool, just right in the town there. We also got to visit the birthplace of Nagatani Soen, which is in the nearby town of Uji Tawara. So just a short drive from Uji. It's a lot smaller of a town. There is some up and coming tea farms there, but it definitely doesn't have the name that Uji has when it comes to tea. So definitely an up and coming tea growing region that we look forward to exploring in the future. In addition to the birthplace of Nagatani Soen, we also got to check out the birthplace of Gyokuro, where Gyokuro was first discovered And when somebody was kind of playing around with different levels of shading, different levels of steaming, they noticed that there was this green residue that started to appear during the production process, and they nicknamed the tea Jade Dew because of this. And the name obviously carried out to this day, and it's definitely my personal favorite type of tea. So it was really cool to see where that was first discovered. So if you're ever in Japan, definitely recommend checking out Uji for some tea history and some tea culture as well. But if you don't get a chance to visit Uji, the next best thing is to try the Uji matcha yourself. So you can do your own little tea ceremony at home. You can get your tea bowl, your chawan, you can get your chashaku, you can get your chasen, the bamboo tea whisk, and then you can get the sifter. This is kind of more of an optional tool. And this is something that I've really enjoyed, kind of slowing down the morning tea ritual a little bit, really appreciating all the different steps. When you're enjoying tea in silence, it's kind of like a form of moving meditation when you're scooping the powder into the sifter, pushing it through, then kind of adding the water in and whisking the tea. This might be a good way to start your day. It kind of slows down your morning a little bit and makes you kind of appreciate some of the subtleties and really appreciate all the work that goes into producing the tea that you're enjoying. So this is definitely something I would recommend. You definitely don't need to use all these extra steps, the sifting, the soaking of the tea whisk, the whisking the proper way. You can just use a milk frother in a glass if that's easier for you. But if you want to make your tea just a little bit better, there are these added steps that make all the difference. So I really hope you get to enjoy a great matcha tasting experience someday in the near future. If not the silver matcha, hopefully you find something else that you really like. But thank you all so much for joining me on this tea tasting. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.